for instance, this is the legal framework for this kind of associations like AKFI and many, many others, which allow companies to get together, be protected from, being able to collaborate freely within the confine of the regulation of the or the framework for the association, but they can freely exchange information within the scope of creating a better standard. In our case, sustainability, but other cases you mentioned, telecom, it's another
Well,
major
and
area.
and how about
Electricity
the
is another.
we've become very interested in how richly complementary participatory learning networks like our strategic advisory service, the Sustainable Business and Enterprise Roundtable, how richly complementary that is with agentic AI, generative AI, because both have great strengths, and both have, real weaknesses. But the combination of the two is really something. Because in the fancy parlance of participatory learning networks, meetings become social resonance. And
Sure.
you need the social resonance theater to check the hallucinations from the AI, because you're like, that sounds like a good answer, but it's not, because we have somebody in the room who's been doing this for 10 years, and
You,
they can help, bring
you,
some human intelligence here.
you get me to jump on a soapbox. Hallucination is equal to devil's advocate in a meeting, right? A person that says that doesn't work or throws a curved ball and everything on the discussion goes on a different tangent than actually the meeting is for, or the networking is for. So, but talking about AI, and you started already to mention how AI revolutionizes the sustainable business. Maybe going back to electricity a little bit, because AI is now projected to be a it is and is projected to even grow larger as a user of electricity. We know that 3 Miles Island, for instance, is going to be revived, right? For
Yeah.
producing electricity.
Well, I do think it's going to greatly increase demand, and I do think there's no way to get the genie back inside the bottle. So the increased demand is now, all but inevitable. But I think to think about AI on an energy metric level is to miss, a revolution in human experience, because I don't know about your listeners, but it's been changing my life, in a
Uh,
way that's deeper than the internet. And the internet, man, I loved the internet, when it was coming, I was obsessed with it. But AI makes the internet look like a dumb tool, because it can be a collaborative partner in a way that's very difficult for any human being to, be a collaborative partner, because it's inexhaustible. And if you're inclined to, really investigate different things, having an inexhaustible thought partner that has information and data and insights that you don't have, means you're a different thinker now. So,
I
and
Again, I mentioned I'm an electrical engineer, but my specialty is actually biomedical and electronics. And I can tell you one thing that maybe it's a deep secret of AI. And here is how it goes. Our brain consumes 80 watts of energy, more or less like what we consume for our talk today, right? And then we are going to see AI progressing with less and less energy. I can go into the technology and the rationale for that, but I'll I'll and you can categorize me as a contrarian. We're using the chipsets that are for gaming. That's the
Mhm.
NVIDIA. And knowing the telecom industry, knowing the capability to go from a mainframe to a computer in every pocket, much more powerful. I think we are missing this curve that AI will progress and energy will go less and less because we have a model, a human model that can energize us, no pun intended, to reduce
Mm.
the consumption of electricity and to be more sustainable AI.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and it makes intuitive sense to me because 100x increase in productivity for a 10x increase in energy consumption in the parameterized time frame, means that you're way ahead of the game on lower energy, right?
Sure.
And one example I'd use is I was involved in the board of a company, and there was I'm a lawyer by training, as I mentioned, and there was a dispute, and it went on for a very long time. And as a lawyer, I don't practice law. I want to be clear, but as somebody trained as a lawyer, I thought both sides were missing the crux of the matter, right? And but I let it go because I'm not a lawyer and I wasn't going to spend hundreds of hours figuring it out, and I didn't have a team and blah 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 blah, and so now just out of curiosity, I checked that very detailed, specific question and answer, with general AI, ChatGPT, and I got back the answer that ultimately I had been right in my suspicion. And but I let it go on for years because I wasn't going to spend the $200,000 of legal to figure it out. Well, I got back the answer the other day, within 30 seconds, right? That would have committed me to making making it clear to the board that we need to look at this differently. And so what that organization's waste of 5 years at the highest level in a dispute, I think would be just completely different if you could access the answer they got to 5 years later. um, and so that's happening now as we speak all over the world as people just query the answer. And so, yes, they get a lot of hallucinations, but they also get a lot of informed answers that they wouldn't have otherwise got. And it's very difficult to calculate the energy savings involved with the right versus the wrong answer.
Sure.
The right answer, sometimes 5 years faster.
No, and absolutely. And I think we are saying two things in the same time. We can reduce the energy, the electrical energy, electricity we spend on AI to get the answer, and we can get better answers. And they save human energy of years, as you mentioned, which is a completely different dimension, right? Of trying
Yes,
to
I
find
get
the
it. Yeah, you're talking about the AI itself, and I'm talking about the ultimate because I think in terms of carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of the companies and the people and the supply chain, all of
sure.
which was screwed up. But if you get the right answer, all of it gets more efficient.
Flipping the coin, you actually doesn't matter the cost of energy you spend in AI today. If you get an answer that saves 3, 5 years, even 3 months of delays or
Of
cost,
inefficient pattern of behavior that
yeah,
wasn't making you money and wasn't good for the client. That's that, what's the cost of that, even just energy wise. But yeah,
was and I think both will happen in the same time. The amount of energy will go down. I predict we spend per unit of answer, whatever we can measure the AI on, and the implications will go up as AI will get better in parallel with having more computational power at lower energy. And this is the Moore's code. We were able to cram much more computing power in a phone that we are in the mainframes of heydays of
yes.
computing.
Yeah, and
And
that's
of course,
and the Moore's law, like, improvements of the photovoltaic, you were rightly identifying as a semiconductor. That's the most encouraging thing in the world today, because not only is that a change in economics from resource economics to products economics, it's also a change in um, how energy and therefore in a meaningful way wealth is generated, and that has implications for the cultural superstructure the wealth supports. And so if wealth is generated from products that are a result of human imagination and imaginative human improvement over time, then the thing generating the energy or the electricity specifically is aligned with a culture of creativity. And so I don't think it's too far to say, moving from fuel-based energy generation to product-based energy generation is also a move from an extraction and exchange system to a creativity system. So then there's all sorts of implications to that when the folks closest to that wealth creation benefit commercially, they then influence things with their commercial power in a way that's likely to be aligned with more creativity as opposed to more extraction. And there's less concern about control, not to be
Absolutely.
overly optimistic here, but yeah, because you don't have to
No,
control it.
and to just continue on this discussion, basically, um, we didn't change the way we produce electricity until recently on a large scale because it was a very simple process. We generate heat, we generate steam in a steam engine. We get an electric motor to or generator to rotate as a result of the steam, or we can use water if we want. And this is the principle anywhere from uh, coal-based to gas-based to atomic. Actually, the production of nuclear energy is not a direct transfer from nuclear to electrical in some way, which we think it may come. But we never changed the principle. We didn't change the principle, the physical principles on how we generate. And now, finally, as you mentioned, and thank you for introducing our audience to that, we can look at a very different way of producing energy, which is you have a product, is a little bit of maybe exaggeration, but it's very much a product like your phone in your pocket, which produces energy. It is a photovoltaic cell. We understand it very well in silicon. You produce electricity, you accumulate it so you can have it in cold days and cold nights, and so on. So it's a revolutionary change that it's an inflection point in the way we look at the electricity as a product. So
Yeah,
thank you for introducing it.
well, I live in Concord, Massachusetts, which is where the American Revolution was born on the Battle of the North Bridge on April 19th, 1975. And we have a garden out back, and I've always been struck by how fecund it is. Like you can pretty much feed yourself with a small garden. And back then people were, right? And then they had a fowling piece for get their protein from the pheasants and stuff and the field surrounding and the deer. And then you can see how, people that are self-sufficient with their own, little farm in New England and had been self-sufficient for, a couple hundred years at that point really, weren't going to put up with a monarchical, edicts from Britain, 3,000 miles away. And, the first revolt, I happen to know only because I live in the town, was in 1680. And so there was 100 years of being uncomfortable as a colony of Britain and of course the folks in New England were the Roundheads. They were parliamentarian congregationalists, not monarchists, and so they were also ideologically opposed to it. But what makes me bring it up is you talking about, generating, energy from a product, that's independent of a centralized system. That does ultimately encourage people to, not accept, the burden of too much centralization. And I do think it's revolutionary to be able to produce your own power,
Absolutely.
and it's only getting better every year. So we're
Well,
not, we don't have a nano grid or anything at home, but it's clearly moving in that direction.
there is a pendulum in the electricity production history. So it started as a plant in your own city. So electricity was only for the city, right? And then we developed national grids and so on, which economically made sense when you have large production centers, um, and can produce it a little bit cheaper than producing locally, right? You're more efficient, economy of scales, as you mentioned. But now the pendulum comes back, as you very much mentioned, very much you said. The your garden is now also a photovoltaic garden, which uh, pretty much supports your home and maybe a couple of neighbors.
Yeah, and your car significantly.
Your car
And
significantly, yes, absolutely.
yeah, yeah, is charged at home from the sun that you're able to store with now a relatively reasonably priced battery. And so, change is definitely happening, but we have focused on utility scale clean energy for a reason, and that is commercially, it's only at, the 100 megawatt scale that it's an absolute winner. Clearly, like it's better than the alternatives. If you look at Lazard's 14th annual levelized cost of energy, you can see that utility scale solar, even when you add the cost of storage to make it more of an apples and apples comparison, because you need the load shift, even when you add the cost of the storage, it's still so much less costly than not just natural gas, but then purchase from existing natural gas project. So it's less expensive to build a new plant. And by the way, it only takes like a year, right? Compared to small module reactors that still take, nobody really knows because nobody's actually done it in less than 10 years. But these solar farms take like a year to get fully up and running. And it's less expensive to do greenfield, new build, utility scale solar with integrated batteries than it is in the most favorable markets just to purchase incrementally from an existing, largely depreciated natural gas plant. And so, wow is all I can say to that, because that means, you know, it's going to happen all over the world,
And actually,
including,
you
Pakistan.
indicated the cost of electricity can go to zero, at least from an accounting viewpoint. If you amortize your solar farm, let's say I don't know the accounting curves, but let's say in 5 years and produces another 5 years, that's zero cost electricity,
Yeah,
accounting
and
wise.
that's the prediction which I found so strange from perhaps the most successful person in the world in this field, which is the CEO of 8 Minute Solar. So I heard him say back in 2014 that he thought by 2030, 2035, I think he said, we're going to zero marginal cost electricity. And I thought that was the craziest thing I had ever heard from a, sort of functioning business person at a high level. But he stuck to it. And now he's got something like 15 gigawatts of developed, solar that he's done, and he's got another 15 in his pipeline. And so I don't know any other, and he's got a small privately held company. I don't know anybody else who's in a better position than him, unless you're willing to, be public company person. but many business people aren't, because it's just, sort of, there's many things about it that are not enjoyable. But anyway, so
True.
he's been thinking that's where we're headed all this time. And he might be right because of course, he uses the analogy to mobile phones and the fact that we're not actually charged for our minutes anymore because that's not what it's about. It's about quality and services around that.
Right.
And that,
It is the commoditization factor, right?
yeah.
And I want to move to a different, but you already indicated how you engage the stakeholders. What is your strategy for engaging stakeholders, for leading the company? What is what's your management style?
Yeah, well, we are one of the things that attracted me to sustainable business is it's all about multi-stakeholder value creation. And we take that as our defining approach to leadership, where we feel it's absolutely necessary if we're going to respect the full dignity of all the people involved here to treat them as equal and as possessed with an inalienable dignity, that it's our job, and more than that, our deepest moral commitment to magnify their dignity and understand their dignity as specifically and consistent with the sort of Oxford Dictionary definition of dignity, understand their dignity to be specifically about their hunger and their capacity for constructive social meaning.
Hmm.
And that concept of dignity as a differentiating, human adaptation that has evolved to enable us to operate, with symbolic meaning across even continents and across different cultures and across even centuries. That evolved adaptation that we describe as dignity um, is what enabled us to become a species of 8 billion. The John Hyatt, the conservative thinker, who was long from UVA and now I think he's at NYU, he wrote a book about essentially why people have such trouble with politics, but he had one line that sort of summarized his review of emerging evolutionary psychology, and that was we may be more than 80% chimp, but we're more than 10% bee. That we have a profound sociality to us as Homo sapiens because we're Homo sapiens. We're not chimps. They don't have this. They're very social creatures, but they're not as profoundly social as Homo sapiens. And so, of course, everybody points to the horrible things that happen in life, like war, and say, what are you talking about? But I reflect on the fact that after every war, there's a peace, and the proof is in the fact we're at 8 billion. We get along, in ways that are shockingly effective. And so if we understand human beings that way, then we better understand how to make them our clients and how to serve them as our clients and how to work with them as our colleagues. And as somebody who grew up the son of two entrepreneurs and the grandson of immigrants that were, uneducated, um, I really think it's sort of the multi-stakeholder approach to value creation is really the CEO's approach, and the cash focused, cash metric obsessed approach is really a CFO's approach. And I have huge respect for CFOs. And my job is to serve CFOs in making long commitments, right? So I'm not, but there really is a different orientation. It's much more towards the quantified models of cash performance, and then CEOs are much more naturally concerned with building trust with all the different constituencies they've got to build trust with, and that to me is just great business, or that's good business, and certainly is not going to be great unless you have great relationships with all these different stakeholders. And if you have great relationships with all these different stakeholders, you can survive the ups and downs and the vicissitudes of history. And we have clients like Merck Dramastad from Germany that are a global company, and they're 254 years old. No, actually, I think they're 353 years old, Merck Dramastad. And I was thinking of T Takeda. Takeda is another client. They're from Japan, 254 years old. And the reason those two are so interesting is they have grown through World War II, which was decimating for both Germany and Japan because they were on the losing side of it, but they somehow grew through that and now continue to grow and have really healthy cultures. And
Amazing.
we definitely think about that as we think about the cascading climate related crises. Yes, these are really going to challenge global supply chains. Yes, there's really going to be a lot of political instability, but the corporate form is remarkably protein. And when it's combined with a culture that is really human centered and human celebrating, then it can survive even the countries it it is part of. Because human beings really, frankly, like to be organized that way, in a way that respects them and is effective and gets them returns. And so those two companies are great examples of truly sustainable business, lasting more than 250 years in each case. And they're doing something very correct.
I think what you're saying is from in search of meaning to
Yeah.
actually finding meaning and being able to put it in the culture of those companies. Amazing.
Yes, I think that and having the privilege of serving them, the people there do generally feel great meaning in the work they're doing. And they bring a lot of focus and attention and creativity to that work. And so unsurprisingly, their companies do very well. And they're definitely not companies that are, all about profit. Like that wouldn't have attracted and retained those people for 250 plus years.
I'll reserve this question for a next interview if you allow me. But for today, I just want to mention the fact that financialization is an invention also of humans. And once you look at the company only through one set of lenses, nothing wrong with finance lens, you sort of miss the others, right? And in some way, and this is for the next time we meet, and I am looking forward to it. But and I have a couple of more questions before we go. The core essence of looking at the company financially comes in contradiction, in my opinion, with sustainability goals, which are longer term than a quarter or a year when you have to report. So the financial reporting, it's a challenge, and we'll leave it for the next talk. But double materiality comes as a way to some a little bit correct this view of only pure finance in sustainability. I'd love to hear your opinion, as I said in the next call. But for this one, I want to reserve some time for career advice because you can give us so much for both young people that are just graduating. We have students like that in AKFI. Mature people, we found people in the mid-career after 20 years of software developer, suddenly they want to go to sustainability and they come to us. So what's your advice? I'm sure you see those people also in your company.
Yes. Well, I do think you pay more attention to what people do than they say, right? Because you'll get the real story and what they do. And what we have done as a company is focus on high margin growth companies that were category leaders in information service provision, right? And the reason we did that is because those companies were structurally likely to succeed over time. So there's personal investing, and then there's, what you do with your time, which is also an investment. And so what we wanted to do with our time was work with companies that were going to be highly successful. And that proved a very good idea. And so I would suggest to my younger friends who are looking for a career that they do seriously consider clean energy. But if they're more conservative, in terms of, risk exposure on their most important investment, which is their investment in time, their personal time, I would suggest they look at information service providers to clean energy, right? So this is sort of the Levi Strauss approach to the, gold rush. Levi Strauss didn't try to find the gold. They sold, equipment to the miners. And
Yeah.
and and I think companies that are really respected and growing, that are in information services to clean energy, are serving a booming market that's a global market, and they're doing it in a way that is structurally high margin. And another thing that they get is getting a little particular, but I might as well be particular, is I'm really struck by, like, my children are going to college right now, and they were so pleased to get into their first choice. And there's so much talk about getting into colleges, and very little talk about the type of company you go work for. And I think that the going to work for a startup is extremely high risk, but going to work for a, C and D series company that is already successful and is headed towards, a public offering, that is very substantially de-risked and still has, for the individual professional, all sorts of upside, because the likely, the company is going to triple in size while you're there, assuming you can stay employed for another, year or two. So if you look for the intersection of all those things, I think you can find it, and then you'd find just an outstanding employer.
That's a very good point. And for people that are in the middle of careers and they change, they want to change their career. I'm sure you met also those people in these people in your uh, company as well as in your business relations. What would you advise them? Also on top of finding a very good company where they can feel their meaning, their mission, as you mentioned, not only be employed, right? Getting a
Um,
paycheck.
Well, I think that there's an opportunity, because the change that has to be made to a more sustainable way of doing business has to be made in um, every field. And so therefore there's an opportunity, if somebody has, extensive experience, let's say in lift truck distribution, which is, what my father did, there's a move to electric lift trucks. And in fact, there was back in the 1980s that he really benefited from. Um, so every every field has to change. And so if people want to, like, I would recommend, to the extent they can, is leverage the great experience they've developed and the great network they've developed in whatever particular field, and then help it, move towards something that is even more profitable, because it's more sustainable. And is that tricky? Yes, it is. But is that better? Yes, it is. You know what I mean? So it's demanding, but what's demanding about it is what's so constructive about it, because it's a tricky, needed thing. And if you're doing a tricky, needed thing, you're going to be able to be compensated for that.
So, Jim, thank you. Before we go, where people can find more about yourself and your company?
Well, thank you for the question. We'd welcome folks going to www.sustainround.com. That's SustainRound.com, sustainround.com.
Thank you. And
All
thank
right.
you for taking the time today. to visit with us, and I'm really pleased to invite you back to a continuation of the talk. We have already a
Okay.
couple of topics lined up.
Okay. And
For
I do have to run, unfortunately. I'm a little bit late. So thank you so much, Manuel. It's been so fun to visit. Take care.
yes, and for our audience, make sure to tune in every week for a new episode of AKFI's Actionable ESG Talk series. Thank you again, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.